Welcome back to the deep dive. If you really want to get a handle on today's political world, you absolutely have to understand the existential panic that swept across the globe after World War I ended in 1918.
Yeah, it was a massive trauma.
Huge. And then that got amplified by all the chaos of the post-war crisis in 1919. And then, boom, the Great Depression hits in 1929. It just shattered everything people thought they knew.
Right. The old ways clearly weren't working.
Exactly. And the whole world was asking this one huge question: is another world possible?
Precisely. And those 2 decades, 1919 to 1939, weren't just about trying to fix the economy. It was really a battle for hearts and minds, for the collective imagination.
People were desperate.
Totally desperate for new ideas, new belief systems, new ideologies, really that could promise something better. Stability, maybe prosperity, maybe even some kind of sacred purpose.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to give you a kind of shortcut to understanding the main contenders, the big ideas that rose up to answer that desperate call.
And we're using our usual framework, the card structure, to keep things clear. It helps cut through the noise, especially when you're looking at 4 pretty different ideologies.
Right. So just a reminder for everyone, every political movement, from the most extreme to the most moderate, kind of needs 3 basic things.
That's right. We look at card 12, the ultimate goal, what's the big picture, the future they're aiming for. Then there's card 11, the political subject. Who's the star of their story? The individual, the nation, the working class.
And finally, card 10, the main policy or instrument, the actual tools, the concrete actions they plan to use to get to that ultimate goal.
Yep. And today we're diving into 4 big ones that shaped the interwar years. The old guard, liberalism, the pushback from the reactionaries, a more localized response, the mafia, and then the rise of social democracy.
Okay, let's start with the one that was kind of the dominant force coming out of the 19th century, liberalism. You could almost call it the cult of the individual.
Yeah, definitely. Liberalism comes straight out of the 18th century Enlightenment. Think reason, critical thinking, this powerful idea that humanity is progressing, moving forward.
It was revolutionary.
Absolutely. Its whole purpose was to dismantle the ancient regime, the old system of kings and aristocrats ruling by divine right and inherited privilege.
And, it had huge successes. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, those 1848 uprisings across Europe, it really changed the world.
No doubt. But maybe success led to a bit of complacency. Let's look at card 11, their main character.
Right. Card 11 for liberalism, the individual. It's all about the individual.
Unequivocally. The whole point of liberal government, its central problem, is how to protect and ideally enhance that individual's freedom.
And freedom meant a lot of things, right?
Right.
Finding happiness your own way, thinking what you want, choosing your government.
And really importantly, conducting business, owning property, making contracts without the state constantly interfering. That economic freedom was key.
Okay, but we need to add a pretty big asterisk there, historically speaking. When they first talked about the individual,
They meant someone very specific.
yeah, usually white, almost always male, and definitely property owning.
Exactly. But I guess the strength or maybe the inherent tension in the idea is that it had to expand. It was pushed, often by those excluded.
So after World War I, you see women finally getting the vote in many places.
Right. And then later, grudgingly, slowly, it had to expand to include non-whites, other marginalized groups. The promise of the individual is inherently expansive, even if the reality lagged way behind.
So if the individual is your focus, how do you protect them from, say, an overbearing state? That's card 10, the main policy.
Which is separation of powers.
Checks and balances.
Exactly, checks and balances. The big liberal fear is tyranny, a powerful state crushing individual rights. So you need things like the rule of law, you need secularism separating church and state, and you need guaranteed civil rights.
The idea is to split power up. Legislative, executive, judicial, so no one part can become too dominant and squash the citizen.
That's the theory.
But, and this is the huge but, isn't it? The critique that really hammered liberalism by 1919, when you deliberately weaken the state's power to protect the individual whose power doesn't get weakened.
Bingo! The power of big money, great fortunes, massive corporations. Liberals were so focused on stopping political tyranny, the king or the dictator, that they didn't have great tools to deal with economic tyranny.
So things like lobbying, corruption.
Exactly. Those things thrived. And the power of the wealthy elite, the bourgeoisie, often went unchecked. They could bend the rules, prevent reforms that might threaten their position.
So wait, After fighting for ages to get rid of kings telling everyone what to do,
Yeah.
did it just look like liberalism swapped it for, well, for factory owners and bankers calling the shots?
That was precisely the perception for millions of people, especially the working class. And that's why Card 12, the ultimate goal of progress, just seemed to stall out.
The promise was equal opportunity, right? A level playing field.
Yeah, but powerful economic interests, often allied with conservative political forces, blocked the really radical reforms needed to make that happen. Things like, say, universal inheritance, or serious taxes on huge land holdings, or strong anti-monopoly laws.
They protected property rights above all else.
It certainly looked that way. So by the time World War I ended, for a lot of ordinary people, liberalism just felt bankrupt. It hadn't solved poverty. It hadn't tackled inequality. It seemed like it was just there to protect the rich.
And that created a huge opening, a vacuum, which was immediately filled by a very different, very aggressive response,
Yeah.
the reactionaries.
Right. If liberalism was all about looking forward, about progress, reactionaries were about looking back. Or maybe standing still and defending what already exists. Card 12 for them is all about defending the sacred order.
No need for new ideas.
No. Why would you need progress? The important truths about morality, society, how things should be are already known. They come from God, or sacred texts like the Bible or the Quran, or just from deep ancient traditions. That order needs defending, not changing.
So this completely flips the liberal focus on the individual. Card 11, the political subject, isn't the person, it's...
Traditional institutions,
Yeah.
the church, maybe the monarchy, established hierarchies, that's where real authority lies, not in the shifting opinions of the masses.
Sovereignty comes from God or tradition, not the ballot box.
Exactly. And their priority is order. Order above freedom, equality. No, that's dangerous nonsense. Everyone has a proper place in the hierarchy, and disrupting that leads to chaos.
There's that example from the film Mississippi Burning you mentioned, the poor white farmer.
Yeah, his only real status comes from being above his black neighbor in the traditional racist hierarchy.
Yeah.
So when the black neighbor starts doing well, gets a mule.
He poisons it.
He poisons the mule. It's a violent act to restore the only order he understands. Even though it doesn't actually improve his own life, it's about maintaining that hierarchy.
That really captures the mindset. You see it in groups like the Carlists in Spain back then, who were literally calling for the extermination of liberals for messing with their ancient privileges.
Or in a different context, the early Muslim Brotherhood, arguing that Islamic principles should guide society, spread by reason if possible, but by the sword is necessary to defend or establish that sacred order.
So if your goal is imposing this fixed sacred order, what's your main policy? Card 10.
It has to be authoritarianism. Forget checks and balances. Why would you need them if the divine or tradition already provides the answers?
Right.
Liberals fear tyranny, but reactionaries fear chaos. They often believe individuals are just not capable of making good decisions for society as a whole. You need a strong leader, a single party, maybe a monarch, to impose order and tell people what to do. Think Hobbes, but often with a religious justification.
This thinking obviously underpinned a lot of the authoritarian regimes popping up between the wars. Franco in Spain, for example.
Absolutely. Now, one of the really fascinating, maybe deeply ironic things about World War I
Yeah.
is that when the crisis hit, both the liberal democracies like Britain and the more reactionary or autocratic states like Imperial Germany or Tsarist Russia ended up doing very similar things. Meaning they clamped down hard. Look at the UK's Defence of the Realm Act, DORA. It gave the government massive powers, censorship, breaking stripes with troops, basically ruling by decree with minimal oversight.
So individual liberties went out the window.
Pretty much. When survival was on the line, both supposedly freedom-loving liberals and order-obsessed reactionaries reached for the same tool, centralized authoritarian state control.
Wow. And presumably once the war was over, that powerful state machinery, that iron fist, didn't just disappear overnight.
Not at all. It left a legacy. People had seen the state could be incredibly powerful, even tyrannical. And the instability after the war created this crisis of legitimacy. Which brings us to America and those two big crises we mentioned. The post-war chaos of 1919 and then the big one, 1929.
Okay, so 1919. The war's over, but there's turmoil, uncertainty. What emerges then?
Well, one response, maybe a more micro-level one, is what you could call the mafia solution. This happens when people just completely lose faith that the official system, the state, can provide security or justice.
So they look elsewhere.
Exactly. They decide to handle things themselves, but only for their own group. It's an exit strategy, not trying to fix the whole system.
Okay, so applying the cards. Card 12, the goal.
For the mafia, it's pretty straightforward. Honor and respect for the family.
And card 11, the subject, is obviously the family, defined by blood, loyalty, ethnicity maybe.
Right. And card 10, the policy. It's organized crime. It's creating a parallel system of rules, enforcement, and economics, often through violence and illegal activities.
You see this in fiction all the time, like The Godfather. Someone feels wronged by the official legal system.
So they go to the Don for justice. The family steps in, uses its own methods, often violent, to restore what they see as order outside the ineffective liberal state.
But intellectually, as a way to run a whole society, it's a dead end, isn't it?
Completely. It doesn't solve the bigger problems. It just creates more violence, more corruption, extracts wealth parasitically, and usually ends up destroying itself through internal conflicts. It's survival for the few, not a blueprint for society.
Okay, so that's one response to crisis. But then comes 1929, the Great Depression. This wasn't just instability. This was a total system failure.
Catastrophic failure. The classical liberal, unregulated free market basically imploded. Millions unemployed, savings wiped out, farms foreclosed. The system itself seemed broken.
And that forced a much deeper rethink.
Absolutely. People started looking towards collective action, towards using the state, not just as a referee, but as an active player in fixing the economy and society.
Which leads us to social democracy.
Right. Now, social democracy also has roots in the Enlightenment, like liberalism, but it critiques liberalism for focusing too much on just political freedom, freedom from the state.
Social democrats were more concerned with freedom from
Scarcity, freedom from exploitation, economic freedom, basically. They came out of the socialist movement, but were the reformist wing, wanting to use democracy, win elections, and then actively reform capitalism from within.
So what was their main policy tool? Card 10.
The welfare state. And the economic theory behind it, especially after the Depression, was heavily influenced by John Maynard Keynes. Think of policies like Roosevelt's New Deal in the U.S.
Okay, we hear Keynesianism a lot. Break that down simply. What does it mean in practice?
Well, the core idea is that the state needs to step in to manage economic demand, especially to counteract booms and busts.
Ow.
So when the economy's booming, the government should raise taxes, especially on large fortunes and profits, maybe build up a surplus.
Okay, take some heat out of the boom.
Exactly. Then when a recession hits and private businesses stop investing and start laying people off, the government becomes the spender of last resort.
It spends the money it saved.
Right. It uses that tax revenue, or borrows if needed, to fund public works, building roads, schools, hospitals, creating jobs directly. It increases unemployment benefits, maybe gives direct relief. The goal is to pump money back into the economy to stop the downward spiral.
So the state isn't just hands-off anymore. It's actively trying to smooth out the economic cycle.
Precisely. It becomes an active mediator between business and labor, which leads to card 12, the ultimate goal. Collective bargaining,
Okay.
meaning creating stable, ongoing mechanisms like strong trade unions, labor laws, negotiation frameworks where workers and employers can bargain over wages, conditions, and their share of the profits, with the state often acting as a guarantor or mediator.
Okay, and the political subject then, card 11. It's not just the abstract individual anymore.
No. It shifts towards the idea of creating a middle-class society. A society where most people aren't desperately poor or fantastically rich, but have a decent level of economic security, dignity, and opportunity.
This really changes the whole idea of freedom, doesn't it? It's not just about being left alone by the government.
Exactly. That's the classic liberal negative freedom from interference. Social democracy adds a positive freedom to achieve things.
Freedom from hunger, freedom from poverty, freedom from crippling medical debt.
Right. Remember that old labor slogan, bread and roses? People need bread, basic economic security, but they also deserve roses. Dignity, culture, the chance to live a fulfilling life.
So the state has a responsibility to ensure people have the basic resources, health, education, a safety net, so they can actually pursue their individual goals.
That's the core idea. It's about providing the foundation for genuine individual flourishing. And you see these ideas becoming really central after World War II, underpinning things like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which explicitly includes economic and social rights alongside political ones.
Because political freedom doesn't mean much if you're starving.
Pretty much.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground there. From liberalism's focus on the individual's pursuit of happiness to the reactionaries desperately trying to hold on to a sacred tradition.
Then the sort of desperate, inward-looking protection of the family and the mafia model, and finally, social democracy's attempt to build collective well-being as the foundation for individual freedom.
It's a huge spectrum of responses to crisis.
And the really critical thing to take away, I think, is how each of these systems, each ideology, works like a kind of filter, a bias, really.
How do you mean?
Well, it shapes what information you even let in, what you see as important, and what you ignore. A committed reactionary, for instance, might just dismiss any economic data suggesting inequality could work because their sacred order filter tells them hierarchy is natural and necessary.
They only see what confirms their existing beliefs. Confirmation bias.
Exactly. And the big danger, which was so potent in the interwar years and feels relevant again today, is radicalization. That's when that filter becomes massive, almost all-encompassing.
You end up in an information bubble?
Totally. You only accept data that fits your narrative, and anyone who disagrees isn't just wrong, they're suspicious, maybe even an enemy.
That feels familiar.
Yeah. And underpinning this whole journey through these ideologies, there's a fundamental, often unstated assumption about human nature itself. Remember we talked about baseline shift. Every policy is built on some idea of what humans are really like.
Right. Are we naturally good, naturally selfish, capable of reason, driven by instinct?
Exactly. So the final thought we want to leave you with is this. When you look at political debates today, the policies being pushed, try to dig down. What's the core assumption about human nature baked into that policy?
Is it assuming people are basically noble savages needing freedom?
Yeah.
Or maybe selfish actors who need a strong hand, a tyrant, or something else?
And then ask yourself, what happens if that fundamental assumption about us is wrong? What happens to the policy then?